Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Sealaska Heritage Institute Spring Lecture Series. My name is Dushkla, or Jay Zeller, and I work at SHI, and I have the honor of being your host today. I would like to introduce and welcome Evelyn Vanderhoop, who comes from a family of weavers, and the flying fingers of her mother, Dolores Churchill, and grandmother, Selena Petrovich, inspired and summoned her into creating the woven ceremonial regalia. She now specializes in weaving the traditional chief's robes of the Naheen and Raven's Tip. The garments of the past proclaimed the Northwest Coast people's alignment to the natural and supernatural forces of the environment. Today, the robes continue to drape ceremonial leaders. It is an honor to produce objects and garments that illustrate the continuing story of power and culture that evolved from the past and moved us into the forces that surround us today. Evelyn will present on her navigation of professional Northwest Coast art practices. She will share motivations, inspirations, and goals to provide a framework on why she chose the career pathway of a Northwest Coast artist. She will lead her listeners along her journey and highlight key steps taken to be a viable artist, including education, training, and the supports and planning guides along the way. If you guys have any questions, please input them into the live chat and we will read them aloud at the end of today's lecture. And with that, I would like to hand it over to Evelyn.
Thank you for that kind introduction. I am honored to be invited to be part of this spring lecture series of Sealaska. I do come from a weaving family, and so I had a very unique lift up on my career just by being Selena Petrovich and granddaughter and Dolores Churchill's daughter, both very instrumental in the continuation of the basketry arts in both British Columbia, Washington State, and Alaska. So, but I'm going to get a little bit more personal as far as my journey into my professional art. I was a very shy child, so I did a lot of drawing and painting on my own. And so when I entered into high school, they had a special contest where only one graduating senior could get this award. It was an award that was set up by a local business there in Ketchikan, Alaska, where I was born and raised. They had lost a young lady who was an excellent artist. And so in her memory, they set up an art award for one graduating student. So, I also want to interrupt myself and say, as I'm speaking, and if you have the any questions or any comments along the way, please put them down in the chat, and then we will talk and go into those questions at the end. So I was working on this portfolio all the way through my high school so that I could get that award. And at that time is when I learned that what you do is important, and that you should strive to win the any contest as far as your quality of your art. And but even before my high school, and even before I was striving for that one single award as I was graduating, even as young as 10 years old, I was painting paintings. And my Nani Selena came in and she saw me finishing up one of my paintings. And she said, "That's a really good painting. I would like that painting." And I said, "Grandma, it's yours. You can have this painting. I want to give it to you." And she said, "No, no." And she went into her little purse and she pulled out $50. Which is a lot of money back then and a lot of money for a 10-year-old. She said, "No, you take your art serious, and it can help you pay your bills. And so it was a really early lesson. And she, at the time, was doing the same thing. She was weaving at her kitchen table, and she was selling at the local galleries. So it was a real early lesson to take your art serious. It can help you throughout your life. And so then in high school, I did graduate and I did win that award. And I went off to the University of Alaska in Fairbanks at the Fairbanks campus, where I met many wonderful artists that inspired me. And I declared myself as an art major. And when you're an art major, you take sculpture, you take uh, marble. You're carving marble as well as wood. I took jewelry classes. I took sketching and drawing classes and painting classes. Um, when you're an art student, they really expect you to have a handle on a lot of mediums. So I would advise young artists who enjoy um, whatever media to go into a liberal arts program and declare that you're an artist. Um, it is hard work. Like I remember going to different social events and they always say, "What is your major? What is your major?" And I'm like, "Oh, I'm an art major." And they would just like, people would just, "Oh," then they disregard it. But we art students work, I think, the hardest. Every art professor felt I always thought that they think they're the only professor we have, and we are only all the assignments are just theirs, and so you have quite it isn't easy to go into art school and be expected to know all of the different mediums that before you get a degree in. So University of Alaska in Fairbanks was way too cold, so I transferred to Western Washington State College in Bellingham, Washington. Nowadays, that was a long time ago, so nowadays it's called Western Washington University. But back then it was just graduating from being a teacher's college, and it was a liberal arts college. And I graduated with a studio art minor and a degree in psychology, because I had met my husband, and I was anxious to get out of school. I'd been there 5 years. I think I would have been a lifelong learner, uh, collecting all kinds of degrees if I hadn't fallen in love and moved on to being a married artist. So I look back and I had enough credits to graduate with a degree with psychology and a studio art minor. And I moved to Martha's Vineyard, far away from Northwest Coast, and I had my children. And my first love was oil painting, but when I had my children, I did not want the caustic chemicals that you work with oils to be around the children. So I started watercolor, and in Martha's Vineyard, I got to be a well-known artist in the watercolors. And I'll tell you, that was my first step into being a professional artist, was when I was a watercolor artist in Martha's Vineyard. Now, I'll start how that happened. I knew I wanted to be an artist, but I had no idea about becoming a professional artist. I was an artist because I produced art, but I wasn't a professional artist. So there was a lady who was legally blind who was an artist, and so she couldn't drive. So she asked me to drive her down 20 miles down the road to an evening water medium class. And so I thought, well, I'd like to join. And so I drove her to the art classes, and then I started painting with watercolor. And I just fell in love with watercolor. And so I just kept on painting. I painted in preparation for the weekly class. I painted what I saw out the window with watercolor, which was kind of freeing up. Watercolor is like pottery, where you're putting things onto the pot, where oil painting was like marble sculpture. You're building things up, and anyway, there was a big difference between oil painting and the watercolor, and I just loved the watercolor, and I don't think I'll ever go back to oil. So I was really happy at that time that I could start painting again. Well, my sister-in-law came into the house when I had all my paintings spread out, and she said, you know, these are as good as any I see on the bank wall. So she worked at a bank, and every month they would change their art with local artists. And she said, these are good. I'm going to set you up with an art show. So then watercolors, unfortunately, you have to spend quite a bit of money for framing them. So so I dug deep into my pockets and framed my paintings, and we had a show at the bank. Well, I went to the opening, and a lot of people attended, but not one painting sold. And I'm like, oh my gosh, how am I going to pay my framer, right? Well, throughout the month, all of my paintings sold. And so I had no trouble paying my framer. And that was my first step into being a professional artist. But the seed of being a professional artist was planted with my nanny Selena, who gave me that $50 and said, "You take your art serious." So for any young artist, whether you like to sculpture, you like to uh, do the wood carving, weaving, painting, whatever you like to do, you do it. You start doing it and work and perfect your craft. Work on that craft and work. So, how did I price my first paintings? You know, I was like, I had never, except for my nanny Selena, had never priced the paintings, you know. So what I did was I went to all of the galleries that were on Martha's Vineyard, and the size and the content, was it a landscape, was it an oil, was it a watercolor? I would go to the watercolors for the sizes and for the topic, and then I would see how much they were charging. And so I didn't start out any less than a fellow artist on Martha's Vineyard. So in my first show, I charged and put that price tag on for what the current artists of the time were having. I didn't underprice myself. I didn't start little just because I was new. I wanted to stand even with the current artists on that island, and so I did. And it was nerve-wracking, that first opening and not one sale, but throughout that month I did sell all of them. And so there I was. Now I was a professional artist. And so I kept up. I had other people ask me to have an exhibit at their gallery. So finally, one of the best galleries on Martha's Vineyard invited me to be part of um, their stable of artists. And so I always had a goal. I was going to have an exhibit, and I was going to produce paintings to fill the walls of that exhibit. So that was really how I started as far as being a professional. And like I say, you use your good judgment as far as what your value is. Now, I worked really hard at being a good artist before I was a professional artist. I went to school. I knew I competed even in high school. Um, so it's really important to take your art serious and take your craft as good as you could possibly be. Really look at your ancestors' work. Look at your family's work. Look at John Singer Sargent, uh, a Whistler. Um, Look at these uh, master weavers, master artists, master carvers, and compare yourself to them and reach your quality, and don't stop trying to be better than the next painting, trying to be better than your last weaving, trying to be better than your last totem pole, your last mask. Really work at your craft before you jump into being a professional. So I had already had all of that experience. I had gone to university, and then when I went to price my work and to compare my work to other artists, I didn't belittle myself in pricing me less than what other people had, because you went through all the time in your university time. You went through all of your time in your bedroom creating your sketches and your paintings. And so you've put in your time. So when you step into the professional field um, of other artists that are contemporary to you, uh, make sure that you've done your best and you're pricing yourself equivalent to them. And um, so so then my mother came to visit me way over from Alaska, way over to Martha's Vineyard, and she brought this weaving, and she was weaving circles. And I saw her do the happy dance when she finished this circle that she had worked on for 2 days when she was at my place. And she was just so thrilled for her accomplishments in that weaving the circle. And I was like, what is this weaving? Because her mother, Selena Paratovich, made a name. She got the governor's award in Alaska for her contribution to the arts, and so for weaving spruce root and for weaving cedar bark. And my mother stepped into her shoes after retiring as an accountant. For many years, my mother was an accountant, and then she retired and went to help her mother, and they co-taught at the university level. And so cedar and bark. And so here she is expanding into the textiles and just loving it. It was just, I'd never seen my mother so excited about her art. And so it really made me, what is that about? I want to accomplish what she's done. So unfortunately, my first marriage, the father of my 3 children and I decided that we would separate. And so I moved over back to Alaska, and my mother was at that time doing Raven's Tail and just loving Raven's Tail. She had already done the Naheen and accomplished and excelled in her Naheen, but she just fell in love with this Raven's Tail. So at the time when I moved back to Southeast Alaska, she was weaving her Raven's Tail. And I thought, that is what I would love to do. So I started wanting to weave. But I asked her, I said, would you teach me to weave? And she said, you know what, rather you go to my teacher, because actually my mother learned this art, Raven's Tail, is a very ancient art, but it had been dropped. 300 years ago, people stopped weaving the raven's tail. They continued weaving the Naheen, but they stopped weaving the raven's tail. And Cheryl Samuel, who had done so much research for the Naheen, she actually went to Jenny Clinant and up to Kakwan and studied with Jenny. And so she wrote the Chilkat Dancing Blanket book. But in her researching that book, she found out about this really early weave. So she said, I'm going to go throughout all the world and find out where I can find this ancient weave. And she actually only found 15 examples of that weave, and only about 11 are actual robes. Many of those early robes exist only in, there's Russian artists who painted the raven's tail, images of the raven's tail. And then there are a few examples as far as they are um, remnants, just remnants that were found archaeologically. So this is what my mother was weaving. So uh, she suggested that I take these classes from Cheryl Samuel. Well, there was a 2-day class at the Seattle Art Museum, and so I went and took the 2 days. And my cousin, Lisa Telford, she's a great weaver of cedar and spruce root. And so she was taking Raven's Tail too. So I was competing with her. We were like, for the 2 days, we produced a 2-inch by 2-inch little pouch. And, but it was a wonderful experience. And so then the next project I did was a button robe that had raven's tail that surrounded it. So you can see it now dancing with David Boxley's dance group. But so he commissioned me to do this. Well, I did the whole robe, but first of all, it was the raven's tail surround edging that I was my second big project, from 2 inches to this big project. So he was preparing a memorial potlatch for his grandfather, who lived into his 90s, and they had been thinking about their 100-year party, but he passed before the 100-year party, and David decided to continue to memorialize his father with a totem pole and with a feast. And so this is where the blanket was going to get revealed. So when he revealed this, the robe in the middle of this feast, there was a collective awe throughout the whole big hall. And when I heard that, as they unrolled the robe and saw and reacted to that robe, I was like, I want to be a weaver, you know. And in those there, it wasn't, he traded for that robe. He traded me a big, a good 2-inch gold bracelet. So that is another thing that we can do as artists, as Northwest Coast artists, as weavers or carvers. There's a lot of trading, like so I made the robe, and he gave me that gold bracelet. So throughout our professional lives as Northwest Coast artists, we're not just going for the gallery sales, or even, like, we could even put food on our table. We could trade things with carpenters. We could trade things with uh, food gatherers, fishermen, people who can fish. I know my older sister April, when she moved to Haida from Ketchikan, she opened her doors to weavers. She always called it Weaving Tuesday. So her door was always open every Tuesday evening for people to come to weave. And she didn't charge money. She said, bring me canned fish, bring me uh, uh, jelly, jarred jelly that you've made. Um, there was a lot of trading going on as far as her teaching people. And that's another thing she taught me was don't give your teaching away. Um, you have to let them know that there's value in learning these things and there's value in teaching. So being a teacher can sometimes be thankless. Lots of times people will learn from you and then they'll turn around and do well with their career and then come out, pull an auntie out of their genealogy and say, oh, their auntie taught them. And then they don't give the teacher, the real teacher, credit. So it's one of the lessons my older sister April taught me, and she was a professional weaver, that don't give your lessons away either. Let them know there's value and that it's worth something. And then they are less apt to forget you in their resumes, right? So that's another thing as a teacher. And that's something that my family um, is also is well known for, is the legacy of being a teacher, that they would take the time to teach other people. So so anyway, back to that robe and that wonderful aha or ha when they saw that in the whole room, uh, to hear that appreciation, um, because our textiles were very much honored in all of our the cultures along the Northwest coast. Textiles were a real big part of our ceremony, our identity, our economic situations, right? So, um, so all at the time I picked up weaving, people were already in my family masters. Like my sister Holly Churchill was already being collected by museums. She was already teaching. April was already being collected by museums and teaching. And my mother, of course, was already recognized as a master weaver. And before her, my Nani Selena. And all of this was with the cedar bark and the spruce root, where so when I wanted to get to be part of this weaving family and weave, I wanted to pick up the textiles because there weren't that many people. Well, in my family, besides my mother, there weren't people weaving the textiles. And so I thought that's going to be my niche. That's what I want to do. And so I started with Raven's Tail. And like I said, I sold my Raven's Tails. Um, I produced curved style Raven's Tail. I think in we could maybe start that slide presentation, Jay. So here's an example of a painting, a watercolor painting that I did in Haida Gwaii. And if you really look into the clouds, you'll see Bill Reed's um, raven canoe with all of the wonderful mythical people and creatures in that canoe. I think Bill Reed had his canoe be honored on the $20 bill. So I pulled out a $20 bill and used that as the but anyway, this is an example of my watercolors, and I still continue to watercolor, but I'm not a professional watercolor anymore. I paint for gifts, I'll gift people, but I haven't had an exhibit for a very long time. I've really been just concentrating on my textiles. Next slide. So here is an example of my first early Raven's Tail. Besides the robe, that when you see David Boxley dancing, pay attention to that robe. It was my first big project. But I went on and I wanted to always challenge myself. So one of the things Cheryl Samuel had done a lot of talking about curve style aprons, but she'd never done a curve style apron. And so I was like, I'm going to do a curve style apron and just push my boundaries and challenge myself. So this is an example of a curve style apron, and it's done completely in Raven's Tail technique. I did not uh, go into some of the techniques I could have used with the Naheen weaving, but at that point I hadn't started Naheen weaving yet. So I started with the Raven's Tail, and I produced 3 curve style aprons. Robert Davidson bought one for his dance group, and then a collector, they collected the curve style, and David Boxley has a curve style apron, so you can see that dancing still. So and then there's a little image of the looms. So Northwest Coast weaving is done on what we call a gravity weighted loom, where all of the warps are just hanging. So the Museum of Canadian History had asked me to come up with a teaching module for Raven's Tail. So that the little bits, examples there in that image, that lower little image is one of the modules that I had sent off to Ottawa for their museum to be able to present to students the art of Raven's Tail. So next slide, please. So then I went and I asked my mother again, will you teach me Naheen? Will you teach me the Chilkat? Now, I'm not a Chilkat weaver. I'm a Naheen weaver. The only people that have the right to say they're Chilkat weavers are the people from the Chilkat Northern Tlingit group in Klukwan and the Haines area. So they're Chilkat weavers. I'm a Naheen weaver. Naheen weaver, Naheen is the word that the Tlinkits as well as the Haidas share this word for this particular art. So I am a Naheen weaver. If you're a Tsimshian and you weave these formline art, formline robes, then you would be a Gush Halite weaver. Gush Halite is the word they use for these special chief's robes. So I'm a Naheen weaver, and so I asked my mother, because I was Raven's Tail and now I wanted to go into Naheen. So I asked my mother, and um, she said, well, no. And she said it, she visited me a couple of times in my Seattle area home. And I thought it was because I didn't have enough material. So I spun some warp, and she came to visit me again, and I asked her, and she said no again. And so this time I was like, Mom, don't you think I'm a good enough weaver? And she said, yes, I think you're a good enough weaver, but I don't know if you have thick enough skin, because many of the northern Tlinkits feel that that is their prerogative. Well, I did so much research that I know that the Haidas were early weavers of the Naheen. So I told my mother, I said, Mom, through my research, I see that we were weavers early on, because I did a lot of research. And that's another thing I'd like to encourage people who are entering into the Northwest Coast art, whether it's weaving or carving or producing button robes. But if you are entering into this art, it isn't just what you're producing, it is how it fits into your culture. And so I knew I wanted to weave the Naheen, And so from the very beginning of my first lessons with Cheryl and with my mother, Dolores, um, I researched how did these textiles fit into our culture? And am I correct in thinking that this is Haida art? So I really read all of the early journals of Cook when he first came here, uh, Vancouver when he came to our coast. I read his journals, and then I went into the fur traders, and so I think that sure you can go and get a bachelor's degree out of a university, but for your specific expertise, you really need to dive into the history of your art and your medium. So I found out that there was an artist who came along and he did 8 portraits of Haidas in 1793. And I was like, where are those paintings? So I researched and found out that they actually were in the United States. The the artist in 1793 was on a British trade ship, and he did go back to Britain, and he did bring his portfolio of portraits of the Haidas there. Um, and so I knew they were somewhere. So I really researched where are those paintings and found out that Paul Mellon and his wife owned those. They had purchased it from Britain. And then when Paul passed, his wife Bunny donated them to the Yale University because I think Paul had gone and had affiliations with the Yale University. So anyway, I wrote a grant, or I applied to be a fellow there at Yale at the Beinecke Library. And so I really encourage people to these things to get ahead in your art. You want to, of course, um, bring your craft right up to as close to what your ancestors were doing. They were geniuses, right? So you're really striving, and you have the level. Their quality is up there, and you strive for that quality. But also, you're part of a culture. And you need to know about the ancestors in your culture. And so I, I applied and I received a fellowship from the Yale University, and I was able to see those paintings in person, not copies. They were the paintings of this fellow, Sigmund Backstrom, who painted the 8 portraits of Haidas in their regalia in 1793. And so that started all. I mean, I've been researching for 30 years about the mountain goat textiles of the Northwest Coast, and I'm hopefully going to have a publication soon. But I want to get back to the Naheen. So I did write a grant. Always, look out for those grants. My mother was a wonderful grant writer all her life. And so she mentored me also in not just weaving, but grant writing. So I found a grant that would help me study these robes in the East Coast. So I was received a grant, an artist in residence grant, also in the year 2000 to study at the museums along the Eastern Coast in New York, Philadelphia, Washington, D.C. And then on my own, I studied in Boston and Portland. So really studying at museums for your ancestors' work is really important also. So so I got a commission to do a robe. And so I got about as far as this in this slide. You're seeing me. Uh, and I was getting to the interesting place. So I picked up the phone and I called the Burke Museum and talked to the people there. And I was like, I'm in a really interesting place, and I know there aren't that many weavers in the Seattle area. I said, I propose that I could go to your museum and sit there and demonstrate this rare art. And Robin Wright, who was the curator there at the time, she was like, yes, yes, let's set you up to demonstrate there. So I was homeschooling my little boy, but that's a science museum as well as a cultural Northwest Coast Cultural Museum. My son was able to have all these wonderful um, people help him uh, tour the science museum. But I sat there and just set up and wove. They didn't pay me. I was volunteering. They knew I was taking my car from the Olympic Peninsula to go over to the museum. So they did help me as far as paying for the ferry trip for my car and myself to go to the museum every day during the week. And so I sat there and demonstrated. Okay, so I'm getting close to where I'm going to see the questions. So anyway, I want to also point out that the pattern board is actually a printout, 8 by 11 pages taped together, and that Bill Holm actually was the one who helped me do that. So I want to say education is important. Refining your craft to the best of your ability, and that means looking back at your ancestors' work and making sure you do them proud, that your standard and quality is up there. And also, I would encourage you to always be a learner. Once, don't say I'm a master artist and stop learning. Always feel like you can do better. You can do better than the last weaving. You can do better than the last painting. So, education, working hard at your craft and your art, looking out for opportunities, writing grants, um, and also, if it is within you, teach. Always think of this art as not yours, but just you're a person who can bridge generations if you're a teacher, and you want this art to be living. It is a living art, and you want it to continue to live, and the only way that can happen is for you to turn around and teach. Another thing, not everybody is a researcher like I am, but you need to know the history of your art. So it's important to look back and see what history and how it works into your culture and how it can work into the living culture and the ceremonies that are happening today. So I thank you very much for your listening, and I hope that if you didn't have time, that you can look into Sealaska's YouTube channel and look at all the other presenters. And I was listening to Lily earlier, and she has many pointers too with her prosperity in her weaving. So thank you very much. And I look forward to answering your questions.
We don't have any questions in the live chat that I can see. So would you like to continue? Oh, never mind. You're there. Start funding. Our first question is, when is your book ready?
Well, I've got 42,000 words in that book. And right now, um, I have had a lady assigned to me to help me guide me through the final stages to get published, but it's it's a process. Getting a book to the publisher is, especially all the research and the writing, um, now it needs to be polished and corrected, and then you put in bibliographies, and then you got the illustrations. So I've written, I'm ready to edit. I'm in the process of editing with the help of a professor at SFU, Simon Fraser University, and through the Bill Holm publishing entity there at the Burke. I'm getting encouraged by the people there. So hopefully in the next 2 years. So I'm trying to think of some of the things that I may have left out as far as encouraging young people to become a professional. Not everybody is encouraged as young children, like I was with my nanny Selena. Um, but other artists, I know when I was a watercolor artist in Martha's Vineyard, and another professional watercolor artist would come through doing workshops, I always signed up for them. Um, I was a professional artist myself, but I really want to continue learning. And in watercolor, it's like people have everybody has a new or a different technique or a different trick to producing some of the things that watercolor can do. So I always signed up for other teachers and their workshops. And I want to encourage people, like when I go around teaching weaving, the two things I encourage people when in my classes is learn from other people. Don't just learn from me. Other people will have other techniques and other ways of doing things. And so it's important to open yourself up to other teachers. Don't just restrict yourself to one. Um, and then the second one is to turn around and teach. And that will really help your retaining your new love. Like I just recently taught two beginning classes at the Totem Heritage Center, and so I hope that they're going to listen now or will listen in the future about weaving and continuing weaving the raven's tail. Another thing that I always encourage my teachers to, or my students to, is to go big. Like I was saying that I started with a 2-inch by 2-inch little raven's tail example, and then right off the bat, I went and did the surround for the big button robe. And so I encourage people, like, think big, go big. Don't keep doing pouch after pouch, headband after headband. Think of aprons, think of leggings. Uh, and then there's other people who are thinking of different things like dance cuffs, and then there's the dance bibs, and then I was listening to my mother, one of her past lectures at Sealaska, and she was talking about Diane Willard, who is a wonderful weaver here in Ketchikan, and she did raven's tail on the top, within her cedar bark baskets. She put raven's tail in there. So um, look for your ancestors' examples and quality, but also go forward and do some contemporary things with our traditional arts. And it's so wonderful, like Lily with her, when we had the COVID, how she did the masks. And think big, but also think what else? What else can I do with this art, with this textile? So I really encourage people to get into the different colors that are available. But
Uh,
anyway, look for opportunities.
our next commenter says, thank you so much for the wonderful presentation, Evelyn. For many artists, it can be hard to balance the business side with the art making side. Can you share some advice on how to tackle this?
It is difficult. It it seems like a lot of artists just live hand to mouth, right? They're going from one commission to another commission. But uh, being an artist and being a business person is not an easy combination, because usually artists are thinking on one side of their brain and math and business is dominating another side of your brain. And so not all artists really can do a lot of the business. I know a lot of professional artists will also hire assistants. I know Robert Davidson has an assistant who answers the phone. Like, he can't always be interrupted by answering the phone. So if you're really producing quite a lot of your art, and you have um, different galleries um, giving you deadlines or commissions, that it is nicer to have someone who can take care of that. Um, I know in my teaching, I say I am a teacher, I am an instructor. If you want me to come and teach, then you need to provide the administration, because I'm not administrating. Um, you need a tax person who's going to help you with your taxes, and a bookkeeper to help you. If you're not good with numbers, then you should get someone who is good with numbers, and subcontract with them the things you need. So also, for as an artist, you need to keep your portfolio. So these people can't help you, like the assistant can't help you, or uh, unless you're ready to provide them with your portfolio. Keep it up, keep photographing your work, keep it up to date, keep your resume up to date. That's your responsibility. Only you know um, what your accomplishments are and what you want in your resume. So those are two important things that an artist should do, is continue to document your art and to be ready for I write my own grants. Like I will apply for different grants, and then try to keep track of the grant reporting and things like that. But really, transitioning and becoming a business is you do need to consider yourself a business when you are a professional artist. I hope that answered the question.
Thank you. Our next question is, are there common mistakes you see emerging professional artists make when they're starting out?
I think that the worst thing you could do is become a master artist right away. Like you're still increasing and learning and gaining experience, and then all of a sudden you're a master artist. I think it stops you from learning. It stops you from so much, even if it's in your head that you think, oh, I've mastered this, and then you put yourself out as a master artist. Just like my there's you should get compensated for your hard work. Just like when I started uh, my first display of my watercolors, I went and looked, and so I priced myself with the contemporary watercolor artists of in the different galleries. But I still, in my head, I can always, I can do better than the last painting. I can do better than the last painting. I think my mother, who is no doubt a master artist in all of the things that she's done in her life, she's definitely a master. But even she says, I don't call myself a master. I'm still learning. The only time she calls herself a master is when she's writing a grant, and then she'll put that master art um, in, you know. So I think it can really stop you from learning if you right away you jump into being a master. It takes years and years, and traditionally, it did take years and years. We had a real setup. Traditional people had the master artist, and they had the apprentices that were working there, and people were apprentices for a really long time. Um, Nowadays, we don't have that system anymore. And so it's up to you to continue your education, continue striving to be a good and better person and artist. So that can really stop you if you all of a sudden jump into being a master artist and stop learning and stop wanting to get better and better and better. I'm always striving to push my boundaries and go into something that I'm unsure of. I don't know if I can do this, but I'm gonna try, you know. So I'm always pushing myself. And so in that respect, I'm not a master. I'm mastering. I'm trying to master my art. Um, so really, the majority of your time should be perfecting your craft and your art. I think that's what I would say.
Sheesh. The next comment is, Hawa Evelyn, how important is it to you for your robes to be included in traditional Haida ceremonies?
It's really important. I'm always, if I get commissioned by a dance leader or like David Boxley or Christian White, I'm always not charging them the price that I would charge, that I would say to a gallery, because I want my I want my weaving to dance. I want my weaving to be part of the culture and the traditions. So, and that's why I think trades are so important. I know one of my apprentices, who now is a weaver on her own, um, there's trades that she will do. Um, so, so those are things just so that a chief can wear your robe. That, you know, that another apprentice of mine who is now a full-fledged teacher and weaver of the art, I he's done 2 full robes for his chief, and I'm just so proud of him as far as how far he's gone with his career, and how generous he was, because these robes take years. And but there's it isn't just about money. It's about seeing our our art being honored by our culture. And so with that, not everything is money. And there is a lot of trade in the Northwest Coast arts.
Sheesh. We have time for just one final comment. And this one says, your lecture has inspired me during the pandemic. I signed up for 2+ years to study under Lily Hope. The history and culture has led me further. Thank you for your presentations.
However,
All right. Now, I believe that's all the time we have today. So thank everyone for coming and joining us. And thank you, especially Evelyn, for being here today and sharing your knowledge and your journey. Gunashish.
thank you so much for joining.
Just ended the stream there.
So we